You know, things are pretty crazy right now in the world, so you know what? Let's take a trip back. Let's go back in time to the 1980s. And for some of you, what I'm about to talk about maybe for the 90s, because we're about to talk about one of the most nostalgic animated shows that we've ever had, and yet it's very hard to find out there in specific formats. And of course, talking about this show. Jim Henson's Muppet Babies aired on CBS from September 15, 1984 to November 2nd, 1991, spanning about 8 seasons. I mean, a show that really, for 8 seasons back then, that was a pretty big deal. I mean, Smurfs lasted for about 9 seasons, I believe. Alvin and the Chipmunks was also around 7-8 seasons. I mean, it was very rare for shows like back then to be on TV that long, because most of the shows ended at 65 episodes to get to the recommended number of episodes for syndication. But Jim Henson's Muppet Babies had a ton of episodes, over 120, I think, of them. But the show portrays the childhood versions of the Muppets living together in a nursery under the care of a human woman called Nanny, played by Barbara Billingsley. The whereabouts of the parents are never addressed, and Nanny appears in almost every episode, but her face is never shown, and only the baby's view of her is a pink skirt and purple sweater, as well as her distinctive green and white striped socks. The idea of presenting the Muppets as children first appeared in the Dreams segment in that year's The Muppets Take Manhattan, which was released 2 months before the show premiered. It's a scene in which Miss Piggy imagines what it would be like if she and Kermit the Frog had grown up together, and it shows the classic puppet style of the Muppets used with the Muppet Babies, and that was the inspiration for the television series as a whole. It was produced by the Jim Henson Company and Marvel Productions, which back then, you know, this was one of their more profitable shows in general. The show that ran longer than most of their comic book shows did. I mean, they did shows based off of the Hulk, Spider-Man. They had an X-Men pilot back in the 80s that never went anywhere, but Muppet Babies was the one that lasted the most out of all of them. As of right now, the Muppet Baby rights are held by Disney ABC, Disney Television, and although the episodes were 30 minutes, they were typically shown in 60 and even 90-minute blocks during the peak of the show's popularity. And now, I was born in 1989, and right around the time the show was coming to an end, the show was coming to its end, so I barely remember when it was airing on CBS. I do have an old vintage videotape, I'm guessing from around 91, since the thing before the Muppet Babies episode I had was The Prince and the Pauper, but the Mickey Mouse short, which was released in the theaters the previous year. So there's like an old episode of Muppet Babies. It's one where it was Sing a Song of Superheroes. That's the one where the water gets shut off and the babies go in search of it while performing superhero operatic numbers in exaggerated garb. And that was actually one of the last episodes that aired in syndication. It was weird because a lot of those, back then, like this and Garfield and Friends had like over 100 episodes, but only a select few of them actually made it into syndication. And with Garfield and Friends, you had to wait until the DVDs came out in the 2000s to see all the episodes. But with Jim Henson's Muppet Babies, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. But that was the episode I remember from the tape I used to watch as a kid. And you could tell because it had like the old Fido Dido bumpers that CBS was using at that time. So that was my earliest knowledge of the show in general, but I really got into the show growing up in the 90s because it was always playing on Nickelodeon. And for a good majority of the 90s, no matter what time it was on, Muppet Babies was always there up until the late 90s, 1998, when they went to the Hallmark Channel, and then they haven't been seen on TV since 2000. In fact, haven't been seen in any way, shape, or form until 2003, they were back a little bit in 2003 when they had those Muppet Baby plushes where you got the plushes of the original Muppet Babies, plus they had like a DVD featuring each episode. And just recently, I actually got my hands on those dolls because I knew they existed and I couldn't find them for the longest period of time. And I wanted them because I wanted the DVDs, because those are the only official Muppet Babies DVDs that there are out there. Again, I'll delve more into that in just a little bit here. But at the height of its popularity on CBS, it ran in like these 2-3 episode blocks on there. Like, they took up a good chunk of the Saturday morning lineup. And this was back when the Saturday morning lineup was usually jam-packed with, like, different cartoons. Like, I think it was like about, 6-7 hours worth of cartoons on Saturday mornings. And even after the show had ended, they remained so popular on CBS that they continued to air reruns all the way into the fall of '92. I mean, they were very popular for a number of years. And even for a brief run in the second season, they had, like, this spin-off show, Muppets, Babies, and Monsters, where they had this other show, Little Muppet Monsters, which was a mix between the live-action puppets and these cartoons featuring the adult Muppet characters. And there's like little segments that actually make their way into the Muppet Babies TV show, especially in the last episode of the show, where you actually get to see clips from the Little Muppet Monster show, where one of them was like Kermit and Fozzie, they're like detectives, and then the other one was like Pigs in Space. And it only lasted 3 weeks because Jim Henson pulled the plug on it, despite 18 episodes having been made. And then the show went back to being an hour of the Muppet Babies. However, a portion of the Little Muppet Monsters theme song can still be heard in the show's end credits for the remainder of its run. And there was another time, too, when Muppet Babies had to expand to 90 minutes because CBS pulled an animated Garbage Pail Kids TV show before it even aired due to the controversy that they had back then. But Muppet Babies was also noted for starting a trend of relaunching popular cartoon characters as younger versions of themselves. And you've probably seen a good majority of them if you grew up around that time period. You know, stuff like A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, The Flintstone Kids, Jungle Cubs, Tom and Jerry Kids. I guess Tiny Toon Adventures technically counts. I mean, the main characters are parodies of the Looney Tunes, but the Looney Tunes themselves are the instructors in that show. And then you had like merchandising items like Baby Snoopy, Baby Betty Boop, Disney Babies, Baby Hello Kitty, Care Bear Cubs, Baby Garfield. Even in recent years, like stuff like Baby Looney Tunes, Sesame Beginnings, Baby Mario, they've continued that concept in general. So even though the show doesn't hold up quite the show basically has had its place in animated TV show history, and it really is a really fun idea in general, where you have the Muppet Babies living in the large nursery watched over by Nanny, and they go on these imaginary adventures that become real to the babies, such as finding themselves on a pirate ship or in the land of Oz, or fantasies filled with stock footage of live-action clips from popular movies like Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones. They also had a musical number, and when the pretend game got too perilous or when an interruption occurs, you know, when if Nanny comes into the room, they eventually, the scene dissolves and find themselves back in the nursery again. And the central idea of each episode of the show was the idea of imagination and the power of imagination. Sometimes the babies use their imaginations to solve a problem. For example, when Nanny's newspaper is accidentally ruined, the babies write their own newspaper to replace it. But occasionally, their imaginations run away with them. Overhearing Nanny's phone call to the garbage collector leads the babies to fear that Fozzie's getting thrown away. Other three themes include, like, the babies coming up with new ways to play with old toys, imagining what life will be like when they're adults, facing common childhood firsts, such as a visit to the dentist or a new addition to the family. And Nanny is the voice of reason, congratulating them on their creativity or soothing their fears. So it's basically continuing it was basically Jim Henson who was behind the idea of making the show not real educational, but not too but still fun at the same time, like teaching kids life lessons, like teaching these young kids life lessons in life and how you're able to use your imagination to solve problems in general. And of course, you got all the Muppet characters here, great voice cast in general here. You got Frank Welker, of course, who really needs no introduction. Laurie O'Brien, Greg Berg. Howie Mandel actually was Animal and Skeeter for the first 2 seasons, and then Dave Coulier replaced Howie Mandel as Animal, and then you had Scooter, Rolf the dog, Gonzo, played by Russi Taylor, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and Beaker made regular appearances, as did Camilla in the form of Gonzo's stuffed baby chicken, and then in the last 2 seasons they actually added more characters, with Bean Bunny and Statler and Waldorf making regular appearances, and you even had characters for other Muppets too, like Janice from the Electric Mayhem showed up in the show, as well as Kermit's nephew Robin as a young tadpole. And one of the characters that was new there to the show was Skeeter, who had never been a live-action Muppet. It was done because the producers wanted another female character to the cast, even though she was voiced by a male actor, Howie Mandel, and then later Frank Welker. And probably the last bit of interesting history about the show is that it's another one of those shows that you look at and you think, no, there's no way that the guy that made Two and a Half Men and The Big Bang Theory worked on this show. And yeah, Chuck Lorre actually wrote a couple of episodes of the Muppet Babies, but then again, that wasn't his only contribution he made to a classic 80s animated TV show. Yeah, Chuck Lorre was one of the co-writers for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song and actually sang the song itself. So yeah, say what you will about Chuck Lorre. I mean, he's made some stuff that is not that great, but you know what? Give the man credit for creating one of the most badass theme songs of all time. And so the big question you're probably asking yourself is, does Muppet Babies still hold up after all these years? And I say yes. I think it really does. While the show was clearly intended for younger children, it didn't talk down to kids. In fact, it applauded the idea of imagination. It used the element to figure out a way to fix the problem. Something that most kids shows nowadays wouldn't really try to tackle, except for a few shows here and there. But for a show airing on network television during the time when most of the cartoons there were clearly just trying to sell toys, G.I. Joe, Transformers, for example, it really did focus on telling good stories, giving us great characters, and learning lessons about life. And I think it is a show that still has held up very well after all these years. The animation is still really good, got great voice actors, some great storytelling, a lot of good life lessons, and appreciating what your imagination can really do. But then comes the biggest problem. If there's any real flaw with the Muppet Babies right now, it's simply this. It's literally disappeared from the face of the planet. And it's a shame because a lot of people can't fully experience the show like we did back in the day because, like I said before, it was off on television by 2000 and hadn't been seen on a network since then. And like I said, in 2003, there was a brief period where they actually produced new Muppet Babies toys that actually included the DVDs of a couple of episodes of the show. And like I said, I was able to find them recently, but they're very hard to find unless you go to Amazon or eBay. The ones I found were actually pretty reasonably priced, so maybe nowadays you can find them at a good price now, but I mean, back then, like, I remember one commercial on television when it was on Nickelodeon, and then that was it. That was the last I ever heard about it. And like I said, the biggest sin of Muppet Babies never getting a proper is that Muppet Babies never got a proper DVD release, and for the longest time, and still probably the main reason why, more than likely the main reason why, is that a lot of the clips from the shows were from other studios and production companies. I mean, you get clips from movies such as Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, as I mentioned, but also Roxanne, Labyrinth, even stuff like the $25,000 Pyramid was actually used as one of the clips in the show.
What's this room?
The game room.
Really? Huh? Now this is a big game.
And now it's time for the 25,000 Dollhouse Pyramid with your host, Dick Clark.
We must have wandered into American Bandstand.
Hmm?
Isn't he cute?
Sheesh.
Okay, if you take your seats, we'll start the bonus round.
And that's mainly the reason why there has never been a proper DVD release from Muppet Babies, mostly bootlegs, unauthorized sets that you find at comic book conventions with episodes that are clearly taped off of television or in reruns. But then again, I bought one of those sets in particular because I just had this feeling that this was never going to get a proper DVD release. So I bought it at one of those conventions. And I will admit, yeah, it's clearly taped off the television, it's clearly reruns, but you know what? It's the best thing we'll have right now at this point, but I think the series stands a better chance of getting released at some point on physical media because, let's be honest, Disney pretty much owns all the good chunk of clips that that the show has had. I mean, Disney, which owns Muppet Babies, now has Lucasfilm, who of course owns Star Wars and Indiana Jones, along with other Lucasfilm projects. I mean, that's a good chunk of the clips already in Disney's hands, and I'm sure they could find a way to get the other clips to put on the set as well. But what about stuff like Ghostbusters or the $25,000 Pyramid, like I said before? Well, guess what? Sony is now releasing Disney releases on physical media. We're getting, as of the time of recording this, the first Omens coming out on Blu-ray, and it's supposed to be the first major release by Sony, which is now going to release Disney's movies through their thing. So There you go. There's the possibility that you can get a lot of these clips back in here. I mean, Disney's not afraid to team up with other studios on stuff in the past. Of course, Who Framed Roger Rabbit's one of the great examples. But they've worked with Warner Brothers, who owns Turner Classic Movies. Remember the great movie ride rehaul they did, and they brought in Robert Osborne and things from Turner Classic Movies. They even started airing some of Disney stuff on Turner Classic Movies as well as on the other networks that WB owns. So it shouldn't be impossible to get this stuff out there, and I'm sure they can find a way to make deals with these studios to get a proper release out there to the public. And hell, look at some of these other distributors out there. I mean, we have companies like Olive Films, and most notably Shout Factory. I mean, how many things have Shout Factory put out in the last 20 years that people thought would never get a proper release in general? So, I mean, even if Disney wouldn't want to put Muppet Babies out there, they could lease it out to other distributors to do so. Or at the very least, hell, Disney Plus teams up with Hulu, and Hulu has a lot of the stuff that's in the show Muppet Babies. So just stream Muppet Babies on Disney Plus. I mean, I'm making it sound like it should be much easier than it actually is, but I think I read somewhere, someone did mention, there was an article recently, I can't remember who it was, but Guy Gilchrist was his name, and he was asked about a question about why Muppet Babies was not available to stream on any of the digital platforms, and he said that it comes down to copyrights and trademarks, like I said before, and the reason why the show has not been able to get to a streaming service. The cartoonist said that back in the 80s there was camaraderie between the studios, something that doesn't exist today amid the big corporate takeovers. Besides using the stuff that was in the public domain, like the silent stuff that we used in the dream sequences, remember the editing on that was incredibly wonderful. We used a lot of film clips from a lot of different things, including Raiders, Star Wars, and all that. Jim was very good with George Lucas. George came in and worked on Labyrinth, and that was not their first collaboration. Their first collaboration was they were across the street from each other. Jim was filming The Muppets, and George was doing Star Wars across the street. Yoda didn't work, so Jim, Frank, and Kathy Mullen fixed Yoda. Then Steven Spielberg was also a very dear friend of Jim, and Jim fixed E.T. because E.T. didn't work. With Gilchrist explaining how the studio worked with one another, he went on to explain how the clips used in Muppet Babies made it onto the show and how different it is now. Back in the day, everyone loved us. They loved Jim, would do anything for us. We didn't fill out forms, request this or that. We basically did whatever we wanted to do with the blessings of all the studios. These days, things are owned by Disney, Universal, and that's not the camaraderie at the creative level that we had in the 80s. That's why I'm sorry to say you will not see the original Muppet Babies. It's a question I get asked a lot. If I had a lot to do with babies, I know how much you guys love the babies and would love to have them back, but I don't really know a way that this will ever happen. It's copyrights and trademarks and this sort of thing, unfortunately. You can read the whole article, too. It's a really great article from Deadline Hollywood. I'll put a link to it in the description below, but it really does seem like that it should be an easy thing to do to get this back on television or a streaming service, because Disney owns so many networks out there, and there's so many ways you can put it out to people, but yeah, those copyrights, the things he's talking about, copyrights and trademarks, I get it. I mean, and he would know it the best because he worked on the show. So, it's just wishful thinking on my part that maybe someday we'll eventually get to it. But then again, think about it. Nobody thought we would ever get the 60s Batman TV series or the Wonder Years on DVD. And look what happened. We've gotten complete series sets of those. But at least in the meantime, you can find a lot of the Muppet Babies episodes online. YouTube has a ton of them. But I'm hoping that one day we'll get a proper release in physical media form or streaming, but only time will tell on that front. But I mean, regardless how you think of it, I do think a show like Muppet Babies should be seen to the public in some form, because it's a show that definitely has held up well with the adults that grew up with the show, and when it was airing, and kids today could use a show that's entertaining and educational too. And they tried it, and they did bring it back recently with the Muppet Babies show on Disney Junior, which I only saw a couple of episodes of it because I did a written review for it over on the website. I thought it was alright. I actually thought it was a really fun show for the little bits that I saw from it. I mean, it's definitely not the original show, but then again, I'm not expecting it to be, but it is still a really good show. I think a lot of the voice actors do a very good job of creating these new personalities for these characters that we've come to love. They add new characters there. It's got Jenny Slate playing Nanny in this, which I think is a really fun idea. It's a really good show, so I guess until the day eventually comes when we finally get a proper original release of the Muppet Babies on a format or something. I guess that's the best we can do right now under the circumstances. But the original Muppet Babies definitely is a show worth checking out all over again, or for the first time. You can find it online. Hopefully one day we will get the show on a proper format so that the world can see what made the show so special back in the day. So that's kind of my little tribute to Muppet Babies, because it is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, too. I probably should have mentioned that before. But if you want to see what I talked about last week, talking about how George Miller is the anti-Ridley Scott, I'll go ahead and put a link to that video there. Check out some of the videos I've done before on the show. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Take care.